Hello and welcome back to the Craft Mansion. I'm David, and in today's video I'll be making more wands from the Harry Potter from the Harry Potter franchise. This time I will be making some Slytherin wands. Well, I guess you already know what I'm going to do because you saw the title. Now I've already made my Pottermore wand, and I've also made the wands of Harry, Ron, Hermione and Dumbledore. The latter also known as the Elder Wand. They're over here. I also made a playlist for all the wand tutorials over here, and as I make more in the future, I will continue adding more videos to this playlist. If you would like to see more wand tutorials, give this video a thumbs up and subscribe for more crafty crafts. As with previous ones, I'll probably use dowels and fiberboard to make the wands. I don't know, I usually make them up as I go along. Clay. To make all the wands, I started with full-scale printed images. For Draco's wand, I started with a dowel 8mm in diameter. I taped the image to the dowel and marked its length. Then, to cut it, I used my knife and went around the dowel, pressing down until the wood snapped. To mark the different thicknesses of the wand, I went over the image with a marker. Then, I shaved the dowel to the lines I had just traced. The wand is obviously not flat, so then I marked its thicknesses again on the flat side. Unlike most wands, this one has a pointed pommel. I rounded it with my knife and then used my Dremel tool to flatten the edges created by the cuts. To get that smooth finish, I sanded the wand on a sanding block. This wand is quite simple actually. All that's left are two rings at the handle. I marked their position using the printed image. Then, I cut 2mm strips of cardboard and super glued them onto the dowel. I glued 2 layers of cardboard for each ring. Some super glue spilled to the sides, so I cleaned that up before working on the rings. To make the cardboard strong, I covered it with super glue and let it absorb the glue. Once dry, I filed the edges smooth, and then I rounded the edges to make rounded rings. Once finished, I covered it with super glue again, and it basically becomes as hard as the dowel itself. Next up was Bellatrix's wand. I made some adjustments to the print because I made this wand from 3 different materials. I traced the bent part onto fiberboard. Then, I carved away all of the excess volume. It's really tiring and it takes a lot of time, but at the end, I was happy with my result, so it was worth it. So I still left some excess fiberboard on the sides. Now of course, the wand isn't as flat, so there are different thicknesses of course. I will add more fiberboard on the top and bottom of the wand. Then in the middle it's about as thin as the fiberboard, so there's no need to add more. I measured the area that is thicker than the fiberboard and traced it again to build it up. Once I had cut the right shape, I split it in two. This was quite easy as fiberboard is soft when you cut along its layers. I poured glue onto the flat sides and attached them to the main piece on both sides. Then I clamped them and let the glue dry. I marked the thickness of the wand and then cut around it. Before moving on to the rounding of the wand, I really wanted to get the top view thickness right, so I sanded the remaining fiberboard to the outline I drew at the beginning. Once that was finished, I rounded the wand, making several cuts at the corners. I managed to minimize the amount of dust I blew by positioning a vacuum cleaner next to the fiberboard. The second material for this wand is wood. I used a 10mm dowel and marked where it will meet with the fiberboard to cut off the excess. I also marked the thickness of the wand and shaved the excess wood. To sand it, I used my Dremel tool and then a sanding block. The two pieces should match up like this in the middle. My joint ended up being slanted, but it can be perpendicular as well, as long as they match. I marked the center of the dowel and then drilled a hole. I inserted an even smaller dowel inside using wood glue. I drilled another hole in the fiberboard. Do you see the bottle shaking? Yeah, I was putting all of my life force into squeezing that bottle and then realized that the tap was closed. Once I overcame my stupidity, I filled the hole and glued the pieces together. Now in the middle it's a bit thin. Whoops. As you see in the picture, there's like this bump, and I'm going to make that with clay. Clay also strengthens this joint over here. I've been using this packet for more than a year now. I've started using this packet when I did long claw. So yeah, I'm really stretching its usage. I watered my hands so I could work better, and the wood so the clay would stick better to it. The dowel seems to be emerging from the clay, so on that side, the clay ended quite abruptly. On the other side, however, the clay is one with the fiberboard, so I worked it gradually to join the two materials seamlessly. To smoothen the clay, I just applied some water and repeatedly flattened it with my finger. The clay has a lot of wood grain, so I used the smallest pointed tool I had to make those grooves. Before using it, I watered the tip so it would easily slide off of the clay. While the clay dried, I worked on the design on the side. So I just finished the whole design on this side. It turns out it should be on this side. I redrew the whole design on the other side, and when it was finished, I marked it with a Sharpie. Okay, so now that the design is finished and it's on the right side, I can start carving it. And to do that, I'm going to use something which I should not be allowed to use because I am a man-child, and that is a wood-burning kit, and I don't know what you call it. So, all jokes aside, this tool is quite dangerous. It's red hot, so be careful, and if you're young, get an adult to do this. Slowly, I carved the design. Luckily, if the tool did slip, it didn't mark the smooth surface, since it needs a few seconds of contact to actually burn. And if it did mark the surface, it would just appear as wood grain. Some areas aren't just a thin cut, but actually quite rough, like these parts at the side. I scored some lines along the fiberboard to create a wood grain. I don't know if it's because I put the clay on something instead of having clay on its own, but it always cracks up, even when I don't speed dry it with a fan. So when that happened with Bellatrix's wand, I filled in the cracks with some more clay and reformed the wood grain. After all the engravings were finished, I gave the fiberboard and clay a light sanding. The third wand I did in this video was Lucius's wand. This was the hardest one, and the one that took the longest to make, even when compared to the elder wand. As usual, I marked the thickness of the wand. I started with a 10mm dowel and then shaved off the excess. To make the pommel of the wand, I used clay. But before that, I needed a skeleton on which I could place the clay. I used baking paper to cover the image and then made a skeleton using hot glue. When dry, it easily peels off from the baking paper. I built up the other side and then removed, smoothened and added glue wherever necessary. Then, I applied some hot glue to the bottom and glued it to the dowel. I started with the base and flattened out a piece of clay to wrap it around. The bottom is flat, so I used a palette knife to shape it. Then, I shaped the lower jaw of the snake. This part is quite thin, so the glue underneath had to be even thinner, and so it was more flexible. On the other hand, I had to make the sides even bigger, so the mouth appears wider. Inside the mouth, I applied a thin layer of clay, barely enough to cover it, because this helps in making the mouth much more concave. The nose is flat, and the eye sockets are pronounced more. More clay went to the sides to create the side of the lips, so now the mouth was no longer a flat curve, but resembled more the shape of a bowl. Then, I made the holes for the eyes, and made an indent in the middle of the nose. Near the bottom there is a ring. After several attempts at making this ring with clay, I was going to give up and make it later on when the clay dried, but finally I managed to make the ring. Along the rest of the neck, the snake has bumps, which I planned to make using beads, but for those I needed to make holes in which the beads could fit. The hardest things to do were the teeth. I started with making a pair of gums underneath the upper jaw. Then, I cut the end of a toothpick and modeled each tooth on it with a slight curve at the end. I inserted the exposed bit of toothpick into the gums to connect the teeth to them. I probably should have made the tongue first, because now the teeth were in the way. The tongue is basically a cylinder flattened at the back, with a hole in the front. Below the pommel there's another silver bit, so I covered the wood with paper. The rings that go around it are 2mm wide and made from cardboard. Again, the clay cracked up, and what's worse is that I dropped my phone right on the snake. This time I used plaster to fill in the cracks. The beads I used were part of an old necklace. They do have holes in the middle, but I didn't mind. They were the right size, and most of the holes would end up being filled in by the glue and paint anyways. I applied super glue to each hole and then placed the beads in place. I know this sounds bad, but it isn't. It's just the way it is. They weren't all the same size, but the ones I used were close enough. To hide the bead holes as best as I could, I placed the hole to the sides. Then, when all the beads were in place, I put a dab of super glue on each one of them to solidify them in place. As you can see, some cracks kept appearing, even after 4 plaster fillings, so I left them as they were. There are another 2 rings at the bottom of the pommel. I started with strips of floor mat foam. Of course, I thinned the foam to fit the desired size. Also, the type of foam I used here is quite dense. If it were soft, it wouldn't look that nice on the wand. These rings are made of small cubes. I superglued 12 of these cubes on each ring. Finally, I cut all the upper edges to make the foam more diamond-shaped. The clay and plaster weren't that smooth, so I used a nail file and gently sanded off the excess. Now I may have not studied dentistry, but I know how superglue and clay work. Luckily, I had that toothpick sticking out for a better grip. When all the clay, foam and beads were in place, I sealed the whole pommel with Mod Podge. The last one for this video is Snape's wand. I started off with an 8mm dowel. I cut it to its proper thickness and sanded it smooth. There are 4 rings at the handle, 1 at the start and then 3 more surrounding the engravings. I made these from the same durable floor mat foam I used for the snake head. To make the hole in the middle, I pushed the dowel to mark the thickness and then cut into it. Then, I superglued the ring in place and rounded the edges. The platform for the engravings is wider than the actual dowel, so I built that up from foam. I made cuts into the side to fit the foam properly. A pair of these go opposite each other, then another ring, another pair, and then the last ring. Then, I covered the wider sides with paper. The original engraving is quite complicated for that small area to work on, so I made it just a little simpler. I'm saying engravings, it's actually adding the details rather than removing their negative. I made these from thin cardboard and started with the circles and loops at the ends. In the middle there's this circle thingy, and then around it there are 4 hooks. The only carvings I did were at the sides, since these aren't supposed to be perfect cuboids. Then I made the cone that goes on top and superglued it in place. The handle was finally ready, so I went ahead and sealed it with Mod Podge. Okay, so the wands are all ready now. The only one I'm going to spray paint is Lucius's wand. This part is silver and I'm going to spray it with silver chrome, so it's quite shiny, and then the rest with normal paint, even the other ones. While the paint was still not 100% dry, I removed the tape and paper. The easiest one to color is Snape's. It's just all black. Draco's wand is black at the handle, with maybe a hint of brown, and then light brown in the middle of the wand. I could not, for the love of God, get the right color here. I tried brown, white, then a bit of red, but I removed them with a tissue. Then, I restarted with some orange and added yellow, brown, and then white on top of that, and finally got a good enough color. Wow, that was intense. The colors blend together just at the beginning of the handle. Bellatrix's wand has the most natural color out of the 4 of them. I started with a base coat of brown and some black at the thicker end. Then, it's lighter in the middle of the fiberboard and dark again on the clay and dowel. The silver snake was dry, so then I painted the black on the actual dowel. The black ones had to have at least 2 coats of paint to seal the color. When I paint ones, I usually paint almost to the end, and then hang them from that dry end with a dustpan facing them. Lucius's wand is too heavy to trust on a clip, so I hung it from the snake head. The smaller end of Draco's wand is dark again, just not as much as the handle. And so, the first wand was finished. To define the engravings and wood grain on Bellatrix's wand, I painted them with black shoe polish and wiped off the excess. Finally, I dry brushed some gold to highlight the engravings and wood grain better, even though it's not very visible on camera. 2 wands down, 2 to go. Like the previous one, the gold dry brushing is my own technique of highlighting. The real ones have no gold, especially Snape's, which is just plain black. So, to cover a bit of the gold, I also washed over the handle with some shoe polish and wiped off the excess, and finished the 3rd wand. The 2 rings underneath the snake head are black. Before making the eyes, I painted the inside with green. Then, I used my 3D pen to make the eyes. You can buy rhinestones, but I usually find it difficult to find the right ones. I used a transparent filament on the eyes. As you can see, some of the cracks of clay showed through the paint, but I covered them up as best as I could. When I tried sanding them, the eyes just popped out. So, I sanded it normally and superglued it in place once finished. Paint doesn't mix with wild glue, it just forms little clumps. But food coloring works just fine. I mixed some green with the glue, so this would end up giving me a transparent green when dry. Carefully, I painted the eyes, and with this last step, the 4th and final wand was finished. So now I have 9 wands in total. It's an addiction. I'm addicted to wands. From these I have to say that my favorite is Lucius Malfoy's wand. I know it's the most difficult and it took the longest time, but it's very close to the original. Although I have to say that from all the ones I've made, the Elder wand is still my favorite. It has an elaborate design, but at the same time it's simple enough that I could make a near perfect replica. I'm trying to upload these videos in groups of 4 wands, and I already have a group of 4 mischievous young wizards in mind for the next video. So give this video a thumbs up if you would like to see me make the wands of the Marauders. And leave a comment down below with other ideas for both wands and props. If you're new to this channel, I'll help you out. Here's the subscribe button, and here are 2 more videos from my channel. Until next time, these are the wands of Lucius, Malfoy, Snape, and Bellatrix. I'm David, and this is the Craftmansion. No, I am your father. No!